Hello and welcome to Ottawa's Tunney's Pasture for the first of 4 days of racing here at the 2016 Global Relay Canadian Road Cycling Championships presented by Lexus. We've got the road races here in Tunney's Pasture and along the Ottawa River Parkway for the Elite Women and Elite Men's events. I'm joined here by Jacques Landry, the High Performance Director for Cycling Canada. Jacques, this is the first time the Canadian Championships have been here for a long time. What does this mean to Cycling Canada?
Yeah, it's been since about 30 years ago, so it's massive to be able to come back to Ottawa after 30 years. Obviously, the courses are spectacular, good terrains for the athletes to actually show themselves. This is awesome because we've got these championships here for the next 2 years, so it'll mark the 150th next year as well. So that's also a good bonus.
So today is the Elite Women's race and tomorrow's Elite Men's race. What can you tell us? What are we going to expect in those events?
Well, it's going to be a tough race in both men's and women's. Women's this afternoon is 110 Ks. Relatively flat, but I mean there's going to be some wind. It's really warm out, really hot, so they'll have to hydrate well, not to bonk or to crack under the heat. I think it's going to be a very tactical race because it's flat, but it's also going to make for a great entertainment value on that front.
And so, who are the main contenders for us to look out for?
I guess for we got the outgoing national champion Joëlle Numainville, who will be here. She's a very good sprinter. She's good on the flat stages, flat type of racing like this. Caroline Canuel, who's here as well. We have Tara Whitten, who's making her way through here as well. Leah Kirschman, Allison Jackson. So there's a fairly big crop of good riders, which will make it very interesting.
And on the men's side, we've got some riders who've been doing the Tour de France and racing at the top level internationally.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we have some top riders that are here. We have Guillaume Boivin, who will unfortunately not be here because of an injury in a crash that happened a few weeks ago. But nonetheless, we have the Ryan Andersons, we have Ryan Roth as well, and Hugo Hull. So we have a good group of riders that are seasoned, actually getting to be seasoned in the European peloton as well.
All right, great. Thank you, Jacques. We'll be back after this with the 2016 Global Relay Canadian Road Cycling Championships presented by Lexus on Rogers TV.
This program is brought to you by MLB Extra Innings, part of the Rogers Super Sports Pack. Follow the teams and players you want to watch.
I used to imagine I was going to be a lawyer or a race car driver. I was going to have a really big family, and every year we would go on a trip. I'd have this nice house where I'd live with all my cats. And I'd have all the same friends. When I was a kid, I used to dream I'd do so much. I couldn't wait to grow up.
Support the Youth Services Bureau of Ottawa today.
Such abundance everywhere you look, everything from the landscape to the river to the rocks to the sound of the rapids. We have a very beautiful life here in Ottawa.
The racing on Saturday got underway with the other classes of events, including the junior races. Here we see the men's event won in dramatic fashion by Thierry Kirouac-Marcassa of Quebec. And then we also had the paracycling classes for athletes with cerebral palsy on tricycles, such as Shelley Gauthier here, our reigning women's world champion, but also the hand bikes for paralyzed athletes, the bicycle classes for amputee athletes, and the tandem classes for visually impaired athletes. The main event on Saturday was the Elite Women's Road Race, 110 kilometers in 33-degree heat. Before the start, we caught up with a couple of the pre-race favorites.
It'll be interesting to see the team tactics that come to play today.
Yeah, now speaking of team, of course you race for one of the top women's teams in the world, Liv Plantur. But here you're all by yourself. You don't have any teammates. So what are the main considerations for you going into the race?
Yeah, that's definitely a big factor in how I need to think about how I approach this race, because normally I am surrounded by strong teammates. And so I think today I just need to be careful where I spend my energy and really pick and choose my moments of where I want to put myself out there and be aggressive in the race.
I'm just here. I'm super excited to do national. It's like once a year, so it's cool to race against all the Canadian. We don't have really specific. We just hope for a strong race. We hope everybody's gonna go give their best, and to win. If I win, I win. If I don't, I don't. But for sure, I would give my best out there.
And it's a very hot day today. Do you like racing in the heat?
It's getting really, really hot, but I don't know when it's that kind of weather. It's hard for everybody. It's hard on the body, but it's like everybody's the same situation, so you cannot really complain about it. So it's all you manage it. So.
The elite women's road race got underway in Tunney's Pasture on this Saturday afternoon under some intense heat, about 33 degrees. All the riders were looking at one another to see who would be the first to attack as they headed out from Tunney's Pasture through the twists and turns of the technical part of the circuit and then up onto the Ottawa River Parkway. As the riders settled into the rhythm of the race, a few of the athletes were already starting to struggle at the back a little bit. But it wasn't until the group turned back into Tunney's Pasture at the end of the first 10-kilometer lap that one of the riders started to hit out and try to set up a gap. So here we see Jamie Gilgan on the front and Allison Jackson, who just slid out slightly and caught a wheel, crashed there on the corner, giving Gilgan a gap, and Gilgan has decided to continue her effort and try and build up a lead. Now the tactic here in an early part of a road race is you hit out solo. It's not to try and build up a gap on the field, but it's to try and draw out some other riders to contribute to the work. But unfortunately for Gilgan, nobody came with her, and so she continued her effort all by herself. And by the time she crossed the start-finish line at the end of the first lap, she already had a 15-second lead on the rest of the field. Behind, we saw the Cyclery Opus team, the local Ottawa-based team, trying to chase. It's a team that had strength in numbers with 8 riders on the start line. But none of them was able to get up to Gilgan right away, and she continued her effort as she headed back out towards the Ottawa River Parkway, riding by herself in a low aero position. Carrie Cartmill tried to bridge across, riding for the Cyclery Opus team. She wasn't able to make contact with Gilgan and was soon caught by the main field, here led by a rider from the Trek Red Truck team. With the peloton fanned out across the road, that meant that the speed was not high in the main field. The riders headed out onto the Ottawa River Parkway in pursuit of Gilgan, but not necessarily wanting to chase her down right away. By the end of the second lap, Gilgan had settled into her rhythm and had opened up a considerable margin, about 1 minute on the main field. And at this point, she decided that even if it wasn't in her best interest tactically, she was just going to continue her effort and see if she could build up a big enough gap to be a factor in the later part of the race. Here again, the main field spread out across the road, nobody willing to take the initiative and lead the chase to bring Gilgan back into the main field. You can see on the right-hand side of the screen, Joelle Numeville is getting some food out of her pockets to refuel for the 110-kilometer long race. As we can see, with the peloton fanned out across the width of the road, that means that nobody is willing to take the pace up. Everybody's looking at one another to see who will be the first rider to take the initiative to bring the breakaway back. For Gilgan, though, the job ahead was simple. She just had to put her head down and keep working. While behind, the pace gradually picked up. See the field strung out into more of a single file. Again, the Cyclery Opus on the front, and then a chase group made up of Trek Red Truck and two Cyclery Opus riders tried to bridge across, but the main rider, the most active rider in the main field, is the one behind, Leah Kirkman, one of the pre-race favorites, racing by herself. You can see her about to cross the start-finish line right now, trying to take control of the race and take the initiative. But behind, it's Gabrielle Pilote-Fortin, the teammate of Joël Numainville, who's leading the chase behind Leah Kirkman. So here Leah bridges up to the chase group. And latches on to the chase group. But she's swiftly neutralized by the rest of the field. At this point in the race, the field was completely strung out because of the high pace. But nobody was letting a gap open up. Here, Leah Kirkman on the front of the field, with Joël Numainville sitting on her wheel. Leah was the only rider willing to make tempo behind. Nobody would work with her. And meanwhile, out front, Jamie Gilgan continued to forge ahead solo. As the chase group, a second chase group formed of three riders: Annie Foreman-Mackey on the front of the Cyclery Opus, Gillian Elsay of Trek Red Truck, and Alizé Briand of the Tibco team out of the US. Once that move went, it seemed that the main field was content with the combination of riders in the breakaway and decided they didn't want to bring it back right away. And so the tempo dropped as the race came through Tunney's pasture for the fourth time. The four leaders got down to work to try and build their gap as much as possible. On the front of the breakaway here, we see Gillian Elsay in the red and white of the Trek Red Truck team, followed by Annie Foreman-Mackey of the Cyclery Opus, Alizé Briand of Team Tibco, and Jamie Gilgan of the Visit Dallas DNA team. The main field behind, nobody was willing to take the initiative. Here we see Gabrielle Pilote-Fortin, Joël Numainville's teammate, dropping back to her Team Quebec team car to pick up some refreshments. With the temperatures in the low 30s, meant that riders had to be constantly drinking to stay hydrated. The riders in the breakaway shared work quite evenly, but it soon became apparent that Gillian Elsay was struggling. Once again, the main field comes through the start-finish with nobody willing to force the chase. All of the big teams were represented in the breakaway, and so it was left to riders, individual riders, to try and chase. As we see, Gillian Elsay was no longer in the breakaway after about 6 laps. She wasn't able to maintain the pace, so we were left with just Annie Foreman-Mackey on the front, Jamie Gilgan, and Alizé Briand. The breakaway's lead quickly built up to about a minute and a half. The three riders continued to share the workload. As they come through the start-finish line in Tunney's pasture. But behind in the main field, Leah Kirkman continued to put the pressure on, splitting the main field into several pieces. But once again, we had some of the other pre-race favorites, including Allison Jackson in third position here, keeping a close eye on things and not letting Leah move at all. Farther down in the field, we saw the Trek Red Truck team and the Cyclery Opus patrolling things. Now the Trek Red Truck had lost their rider from the breakaway. They still weren't able to organize a chase. Leah Kirkman was the one rider who was forced to do all the chasing. Nobody seemed willing to give her any assistance. With gaps opening up in the main field, some of the riders were beginning to panic. Meanwhile, out front, Jamie Gilgan had found the pace too high, spending 40 kilometers at the beginning of the race on her own. Just wore her out too much, and she soon dropped off the pace. And that left Annie Foreman-Mackey and Alizé Briand as the only two riders in the breakaway. At this point in the race, the main field was about 2 minutes behind the breakaway. And again, Allison Jackson trying to go to the front to inject some pace into the main field, but nobody was able to organize a coordinated chase. Leah Kirkman was getting increasingly frustrated and brought back to talk to her team director, Kevin Field. But with nobody willing to help her, she wasn't able to make a dent into the leader's gap. Annie Foreman-Mackey and Alizé Briand continued to forge ahead. With about 2 laps to go, they had a 2-minute gap. Over a main field, here led by Caroline Canuel, with some small attacks happening from the Cyclery Opus. The Cyclery Opus riders were just trying to disrupt any organized chase. Help their teammate Annie Foreman-Mackey here with Alizé Briand maintain their gap. Foreman-Mackey is using her track skills to maintain a very low aerodynamic position. There's a big advantage on the windy conditions on this Saturday. Once again, Leah Kirkman was forced to do all the chasing work on her own. Quickly marked by Rally Cycling and Joël Numainville's teammate, Gabriel Pilote-Fortin. With about 17 kilometers to go, as the two leaders passed the hairpin at the far western end of the Ottawa River Parkway, the pace proved too much for Alizé Briand. She was no longer able to hold on to Annie Foreman-Mackey's wheel. And faded back to the main field. That left Annie Foreman-Mackey with a major task. With less than a 2-minute lead, she still had almost 20 kilometers to race by herself in hot, windy conditions. She only had one choice but to put her head down and go for it. Meanwhile, back in the main field, the riders were refueling through the lead zone. But once again, nobody was organizing a strong chase. Just over a lap to go, Annie Foreman-Mackey came back into Tunney's pasture. You could see with her shoulders dropping and her head bobbing that she was really starting to struggle. Leah Kirkman continued to force the pace in the main field, which had been whittled down to only about 30 riders. But Foreman Mackey continued to forge ahead with 1 lap to go. Just 10 kilometers to go for Annie Foreman Mackey, but her lead had been cut down to 1 minute and 30 seconds. Things were looking a little difficult for Annie Foreman Mackey at this point as she struggled. At the same time, Leah Kirkman and Trek Red Truck were bringing the pace up in the main field and trying to bring that gap back. Normally in 10 kilometers, 1 minute and 30 second lead shouldn't be enough to win the race. But Annie Foreman Mackey had no choice but just to keep going. She was fully committed to the breakaway as she headed back out towards the Ottawa River Parkway for the last time. Annie Foreman Mackey is a track racer, and she's honed her aerodynamic position over many, many hours of racing on the velodrome. She's able to push through that pain. As you can see in the grimace on her face, she was really suffering at this point. Behind in the main field, the chase continued, but it was never properly organized. The cyclery Opus was able to get up to the front of the group and make sure that they were able to disrupt any proper chase that was taking place. And as Annie Foreman Mackey came back into Tunney's pasture for the last time, she was visibly on her last legs. But with only 3 kilometers to go, the race win was in the bag for her. Behind, her cyclery Opus teammates were trying to set up the sprint for Tara Whitten. But Leah Kirkman, here sitting in second position, is one of the best sprinters in the world and was looking for a podium finish. But one thing was certain is that Annie Foreman Mackey was going to hold on to the lead. Here she rounds the final corner with just 280 meters to go. Her grimace is turned into a smile as she gets set to celebrate victory and her first ever national title in the women's elite road race. So an Ottawa rider riding for an Ottawa-based team, winning the Canadian Championships in Ottawa. Annie Foreman Mackey was completely spent after the finish of the race, could not even stand. Here her team manager, Vince Caceres, the owner of the Cyclery Bike Shop, congratulated her for a well-earned victory. As you can see from Annie Foreman Mackey's breathing that she's really struggling after this race-long effort. Spent about 80 kilometers in the breakaway in 33-degree heat. Was absolutely drained at the finish. But her team sponsor, Vince Caceres, is delighted with the victory. It's nothing better than winning a race in your hometown. Meanwhile, behind, just 280 meters to go, Leah Kirkman led the peloton around the final corner, hoping to secure a second spot on the podium and open up the sprint. But Joelle Numainville, a world-class sprinter herself, was able to overpower her and take second place on the line. Kirkman was third, and Tara Whitten, 2012 Olympic medalist and teammate to Annie Foreman Mackey, finished fourth. So a surprise victory for Annie Foreman Mackey, who tops the leaderboard, solo win at the Canadian Elite Women's Road Championships. We caught up with Annie Foreman Mackey after the finish.
Well, it was really exciting because we came into this race with the numbers, maybe not the favorites to win. We were a bit of underdogs, but we, this team, the Cyclery Opus, we trust in each other. I knew that as soon as I got off the front, I had 8 teammates ready to go as soon as, at any time if we got caught. So I knew I could put it all on the line, knowing that I trusting my teammates. The last couple, it was a bit earlier than I wanted to go, but yeah, the last lap and a half, I was just holding on for dear life, seeing stars, trying to be safe because I didn't want to crash myself out. But yeah, I couldn't be happier. It was an amazing team ride. My teammate was third. Ariane won the under 23. It couldn't have been a better day for the team.
So Annie Foreman-Mackey celebrates on the podium here with Joël Numainville in second place on the left of the screen, and Leah Kirkman in third place. We'll be back after this with the elite men's race on Rogers TV.
Play 4 games of bingo from the comfort of your own home each Monday at 7 p.m. for your chance to win money from our $2,000 regular bingo or $5,000 super bingo night. Kiwanis TV Bingo, Mondays at 7 p.m. on Rogers TV.
Find out what's cooking in Ottawa. Whether you're a master chef or a sous chef in training, we've got the recipe for fun. So tune in weekdays at 11. Watch and join in during the daytime.
So why volunteer at Rogers TV? Well, it's fun, exciting, and challenging. You can develop practical, hands-on skills in TV production, make new friends, and have fun, all while giving back to your community. For a few hours a week, you can be part of a great team making great local television. Want to find out more? Get in touch with us at rogerstv.com. Make your mark and find a new passion as a Rogers TV volunteer.
We're ready to eat on Ottawa Eats. Make sure you check it out on Rogers TV.
This is Rogers TV, Ottawa.
Welcome back to coverage of the 2016 Canadian Road Cycling Championships on Rogers TV for the elite men's 180-kilometer road race here in Tunney's Pasture. A very windy day and very hot too at 34 degrees. Intense heat and humidity will make this race very hard for the riders. 140 riders on the start line. All eyes were on 3 of the pre-race favorites, riders who spend their year racing for European professional teams. Ryan Anderson, Swain Tuft, and Hugo Ull.
From my own focus, I just hope to watch and maybe do the late game in the race, and I'm by myself, so I'm hoping the race will just come back together to even if it's 40 guys and I'm there, and have a good chance then.
Yeah, hopefully it's a really aggressive, hard race, and as far as I'm playing it, I just have to be conservative and really hope that I make a few of the right moves, and then just have to play the waiting game.
We're going to see how it goes. It's never easy to manage a race because as we race in Europe, everybody knows us and looking at us. So it's not easy to go away or try to do some move because everybody cover us. And we had some big team in the race also with big number like Silver Pro Cycling. I think they're 13 riders. Garneau Québécois also have maybe 8 or 10 riders. So for us alone, sometimes it's hard, but we're going to play our card at the best as we can.
6, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Here we go! Canadian Global Relay National Road Championship.
As the riders rolled off the start, we saw the orange jerseys of the Silver Pro Cycling team already massing on the front. This is the team with the greatest number of riders on the start, 13 riders, which allowed them to exploit their strength of numbers and make sure that they were in every move of the race. But moving up on the left side of the field, already we had one of the riders from one of the other big Canadian teams, Garneau Québécois, Bruno Langlois, launching the very first attack of the day, just a few hundred meters after the start. While Langlois' move was quickly chased down, it marked the beginning of a very aggressive race. The predominantly orange jerseys at the front of the pack showed that Silver Pro Cycling was keeping a very close eye on things and not letting anybody get away without at least one of the silver riders in tow. Once the main field was out on the Ottawa River Parkway, Silver continued to pile on the attacks. here with Rally Pro Cycling's Will Routley in second position. And Garneau Québécois riders constantly reacting to every move. Once again, Silver Pro Cycling on the front here, trying to get something going. This time with a Team H&R block rider, as well as a rider from Team Race Clean, which is the Canadian National Development Program. The riders rounded the hairpin by the War Museum for the first time. One rider hooked bars in the braking area, but quickly got back on his feet after crashing to the deck. Now Trek Red Truck were on the front, trying to get away. In second position here, Ottawa's own Matteo Dalcin, ever vigilant, trying to go with those moves. Matteo adopted his distinctive aerodynamic position with his hands draped over the handlebars as he tried to open up a gap on the main field. Soon there was a breakaway of 8 riders. This included Dalcin, as well as Rob Britton of the rally team. And by the end of the first lap, the riders had about a 20-second gap. And they quickly got their heads down and tried to open up the gap even more. Behind in the main field, the attacks were coming thick and fast. The high pace meant that the entire group was strung out in a long, single file. The breakaway continued to work well together, and by the time they were out on the parkway, the main field could see them coming up the opposite direction of the boulevard with about a half-minute lead. It was proving difficult for the main field to chase with these constant braking areas. And this course, which is flat by road cycling standards, is actually a lot harder than a lot of riders expected. A lot of corners, some short uphill sections, and a very technical portion through Tunney's pasture. The riders in the break at this point were Rob Britton here on the front, Matteo Dalcin, Dylan Davies, David Boily, Émile Lejean, Mitchell McDonald, Travis Samuel, and Danik Van Dale. These riders represented the 2 biggest teams in the race, Louis Garneau Québécois and Silver Pro Cycling, as well as the Vancouver-based H&R Block team. Here we have 2 riders trying to bridge across, and the main field, which continued to be strung out into a long line, although the pace had come off a little bit as the lead built up to over 1 minute. And with the orange jerseys of the Silver Pro Cycling team at the front of the group, patrolling things along with Garneau Québécois, nobody else was able to organize a chase to bring the group back. While our 2 chasers continued to try to bridge across. And the main field out on the parkway was once again strung out as the pace picked up. Here Matteo Dalcin hits the front of the breakaway. His trademark aero position. You can see on the opposite side of the boulevard is the main field heading in the opposite direction. At this point in the race, some of our pre-race favorites, Swain Tuft, Hugo Hull, Ryan Anderson, started to go to the front and pile on the pressure. The main field in the background, as the breakaway heads through the start-finish line, continued to be fully strung out. Up front, the riders were able to focus on keeping themselves hydrated and as cool as possible despite the heat, dropping back to their team cars to pick up water. Our two chasers were unable to make any impact in the main field, and behind we see Swain Tuft leading the main field with Hugo Hull on his wheel and Ryan Anderson. And this started to create major gaps in the field. The chasing group had been whittled down to just 15 riders, here led by Ben Perry of Silver Pro Cycling, as the rest of the main field struggled to maintain contact. But up front, the breakaway riders were not concerned with the action behind. They just settled in and continued to try and build their gap. Here, Swain Tuft leads the main field through the far western end of the course. But the chase still wasn't within view of the breakaway. Here they head towards the far eastern end of the course at the War Museum, and then back onto Tunney's pasture. Now, as the gap dropped to about 1 minute, the breakaway was down to just 5 riders, and the main field had grown a little bit, but continued to be strung out as riders like Hugo Hull continued to put on the pressure. But Silver Pro Cycling and Garneau Québécois continued to lay down the attacks. Alex Catterford was the first one to go, and he was able to draw out Bruno Langlois of Garneau Québécois and former Canadian champion Will Routley. The breakaway was down to just 7 riders, but the 3 chasers quickly ate into their lead. Behind in the main field, there was no organized chase. Silver Pro Cycling continued to pile on the attacks simply to disrupt the rhythm of the group. Up front, the leaders continued to work together well, cruising along the Ottawa River Parkway at speeds of around 45 kilometers an hour. Here, Team Silver director Gord Fraser hands water to Matteo Delsin, keep him hydrated. It's a constant struggle in a 180-kilometer race to maintain your fluid levels, and so riders are constantly dropping back to their team cars to pick up fresh bottles. The 3 chasers continued to eat into the lead of the front group. Here, Bruno Langlois of Garneau Québécois powers on the front, with 2010 Canadian champion Will Routley on his wheel, and Alex Catterford, a local boy from Ottawa. The riders in the breakaway were well aware of the chase group coming across, but since all 3 riders had teammates in the front group, they didn't worry about fending them off, because it was in their tactical interest to allow the 3 to join the front group. One great feature of this course around Ottawa's Tunney's pasture is with its hairpin bends and technical section, through the start-finish area is the riders have repeated points of reference where they can see the other groups out on the course. That meant the riders in the main field as well as the riders in the breakaway were able to keep an eye on where the other groups were at all times. Communication is key in a race of this length, where team tactics play such an important role. Here the main field was whittled down to just about 30 riders and seemed to have no interest in chasing down the breakaway. So with a little bit more than 2-minute gap, the peloton seemed to have lost interest in chasing down the break. Soon, the 3 chasers joined the front breakaway, and we had a front group of 10 riders. Of the Silver Pro Cycling team, Matteo Dalcin, Ben Perry, and Nicolas Masbourian. From Rally Pro Cycling, the 2010 Canadian champion Will Routley and Rob Britton. And from Garneau Québécois, David Boilly, Olivier Brisebois, and Bruno Langlois. And finally, 2 riders from the H&R Block Pro Cycling team, Danik Van Dale and Travis Samuel. Another lap later, the breakaway's gap had grown to more than 3.5 minutes. This race was quickly becoming a race of just 10 riders. The riders in the main field seemed to realize that they were swiftly dropping out of contention. During the lull in the previous laps, several of the drop groups had managed to catch back onto the main field. Its numbers had now swelled to close to 60 riders. Despite this strength in numbers, nobody was able to organize a chase. And as the 10 riders in the breakaway worked together well, their lead continued to grow. One advantage the breakaway riders had was the ability to easily drop back to their team cars to get water and stay hydrated. And with 70 kilometers to race, the lead for the breakaway had grown to over 4 minutes. The main field behind were unable to organize a proper chase, and the strong winds wasn't making matters any easier, as dust from the dry grass was being blown in the riders' faces. And here we see one of the riders from the development team, Team Race Clean on the front, unable to make any dent in this breakaway's lead. Once again out on the parkway, the 10 riders continued to forge ahead and share the workload. But as the finish approached, the riders started to look at one another. At this point in the race, with the breakaway less than a minute from lapping the main field, the officials made the call to pull the riders out of the race. This is unprecedented at Canadian Road Championships on a 10-kilometer circuit for the breakaway to almost lap the main field. The move from the officials effectively meant that the race was down to just 10 riders. And this with 40 kilometers to go, the 10 riders continued to work together well. But suddenly, with 2 laps to go, the attack started. Silver Pro Cycling had the advantage in numbers with 3 riders in the breakaway. But it was Will Routley of Rally Pro Cycling, shown here on the front, who hit out first. He was covered right away by Matteo Dalcin and then Bruno Langlois of the Garneau Québécois team. and the attack was quickly shut down. And the attacks continued, putting some of the riders in difficulty, but no single rider was able to gain an advantage over the group. We had the usual suspects on the front: Bruno Langlois from Garneau Québécois and his teammate David Boily, as well as Matteo Delsin, Will Routley, and Ben Perry. Finally, the decisive attack came as Matteo Delsin broke away off the front, bringing Bruno Langlois with him, and then a counterattack of Will Routley, followed by Ben Perry, made it across to the pair. Once the four riders formed together at the front of the race, Silver Pro Cycling had the numerical advantage, with Matteo Delsin and Ben Perry versus one rider from Rally Pro Cycling, Will Routley, and one rider from Garneau Québécois, Bruno Langlois. As the four lead riders headed into the start-finish area with 20 kilometers to go, Bruno Langlois was clearly frustrated with the cooperation in the group, and the attacks continued to come. Here Delsin launching with Will Routley on his wheel. But once again, nobody was able to gain a decisive advantage in the group. Again, Will Routley of Rally Pro Cycling carries through on the attack, Matteo Delsin of Silver Pro Cycling on his wheel, and coming back, Bruno Langlois of Garneau Québécois and Ben Perry of Silver Pro Cycling. But out on the parkway, once again, the riders were all together, and they continued to share the workload. But the cooperation was never far from breaking down, as gaps kept opening up and riders felt each other out with small attacks. Here, Silver Pro Cycling's advantage in numbers meant that they were always able to have a rider up front. And thanks to their team director, Gord Fraser, an Ottawa native and one of the most successful Canadian pro cyclists in history, they had an excellent tactical brain behind the team. Heading into Tunney's pasture for the second last time, Matteo Delsin continued to lead the group, with Bruno Langlois on his wheel, Will Routley, and finally Ben Perry. And the attacks continued as the riders headed through Tunney's pasture. With one lap to go, it was still a stalemate with just four riders in the front group, nobody able to gain a clear advantage. Matteo Delsin continued to lead after 160 kilometers in the breakaway. With 10 kilometers to go, Bruno Langlois launched yet another attack. It was immediately marked by Ben Perry, followed by Will Routley and Matteo Delsin. As the riders headed out of Tunney's pasture for the last time, the first cracks started to show in the group as Matteo Delsin was unable to hold the pace of Langlois' attack. Delsin quickly lost 50 meters on the other three riders, but he didn't give up and continued to chase to try and close back on. This time it was Will Routley putting on the pressure, hoping to eliminate Matteo Delsin from the front of the group. Bruno Langlois also took up the effort to distance Delsin, while Ben Perry was able to sit on and not share in the workload. Delsin continued to plug away with his chase and gradually, meter by meter, dragged his way back up to the group. Finally, at the western end of the course, Delsin managed to catch back on. At this point, he had about 7 kilometers to race. And in a classic road racing tactic, Delsin used the momentum of catching back on to launch an attack of his own. But with his legs almost spent, Bruno Langlois had no difficulty in chasing him back down. And by the time the riders reached the far eastern end of the course, it was just the 4 of them together in yet another stalemate. Langlois was the next to attack, countered immediately by Ben Perry and Will Routley, as Delsin continued to suffer from his race-long effort and was quickly distanced. But Delsin is a fighter, and he put his head down and continued to chase back on. With the other 3 riders up front in a stalemate, and nobody willing to push the effort through, Delsin was able to once again, slowly, meter by meter, drag his way back onto the front group. That meant, with about 3 kilometers to race, the 4 riders headed back into Tunney's pasture together. And the finale was set up for a 4-up sprint for the overall title. With all 4 riders looking at one another, the pace dropped way off. The riders were rolling at maybe just 35 kilometers an hour as they entered Tunney's pasture. And Delsin launched yet another attack. This time countered by Bruno Langlois, Ben Perry able to sit on his wheel, and Will Routley sitting in 4th position. From this point on, it was all about the final corner, and Delsin led, but lost his front wheel going through the corner. As you can see, his front wheel slides out, and he slides into the curb. Will Routley tries to avoid, but rolls his rear tire, and Ben Perry crashes over top of them. That meant that Bruno Langlois was able to ride through the group and cruise in to a solo victory. So at 37 years of age, Bruno Langlois, who's finished in almost every place in the top 10 except first over the last 15 years, finally Canadian champion in 2016. A well-earned victory. He managed to stay upright in the final corner as the other riders crashed out of the race. Ben Perry was the first rider to pick himself up and cross the line in 2nd place. Will Routley, who'd rolled his rear tire, was forced to pick up his bike and run across the finish line. A bitter ending to the race for the 2010 champion, who had been in an ideal position to take the sprint win, coming into that final corner in 2nd position. And almost taking 3rd from Routley was Garneau Québécois' David Boily. As for Matteo Delsin, he was tended to by medical personnel after his crash and would eventually get up and cross the finish line in 10th position, 8 minutes and 15 seconds behind the winner. X-rays taken at hospital later on showed that he hadn't broken any bones. After the finish, we caught up with our new Canadian champion, Bruno Langlois of the Garneau Québécois team.
It's hard to believe, to be honest. I came here without a lot of, I mean, I knew my fitness was pretty good. We raced hard in Beauce and Saguenay, but I got sick a bit after that, so I came here without any pressure on me, and I think it's the best way to approach a national championship because you never know what's going to happen. So I came in and then I just raced in the front like I always do, and I knew the race going to be kind of poker game, you know, with the course. But the heat was a big factor, and usually I perform well in the heat, so for me it was really good. And then from there I had like 2 teammates in the front, a group of 10, and then we worked all together. And after that, well, I followed the attack, and I knew my chance to win the sprint was not possible because I don't sprint. So I ended up with 2 guys from the same team. It was pretty hard to control. I tried to attack, but the guy was too strong, and then the wind is really hard to get away with, like a hard-held wind. So, and then at the end, they came really fast. I was 4th wheel, and unfortunately they crashed. They went a little bit too fast, so I was a little bit behind. I was able to go around, and I won the race.
Well, a win is a win, right?
Yeah,
so,
a win is a win.
It's disappointment is it's palpable right now. The team is certainly deflated. You know, I think we had that win about as in the bag as I can say right now. I mean, Rowley and Bruno would have had something to say, but I think it was looking good. So we just have to regroup. You know, we had a disappointing Beauce with a crash in the time trial for Ryan that took away a stage win there. So it's just hopefully these don't come in threes because we've had a couple of really bad lucks for Team Silber, but that's cycling.
2 days of surprises and drama here at the Global Relay Canadian Road Cycling Championships presented by Lexus. Surprise winners on both days with Annie Foreman-Mackey riding for the local The Cyclery Opus team taking the win in the women's race, and on Sunday a dramatic finish to the race. Matteo Dalcin spends 179 kilometers in the breakaway, a local boy, and a crash in the final corner ends his chances just a few hundred meters from the finish line. And another surprise winner, of course, with Bruno Langlois, the 37-year-old from Quebec. 2 great days of racing here in the nation's capital. Thank you for watching on Rogers TV.
And that completes our day of racing here in Ottawa.